Annyeonghaseyo, half a day, and warm greetings, everyone. My name is Monaeka Flores. I am a member of Prutehi Guåhan. We are a community-based action group in Guam, an unincorporated territory and military colony of the United States. I apologize for not being able to attend in person, and also want to thank Pi스모모의 and all the organizers for inviting me to speak at the 2025 COMPSA convening Peace and Security for All, Vulnerability-Based Security. We are in very uncertain and overwhelming times right now, and it is absolutely critical that we connect and recognize the ways our struggles for peace and genuine security are closely linked, and also find ways to build capacity and strategize together. I'm deeply honored to be here today to stand in solidarity with all of you to resist the war machine, US imperialism, rising authoritarianism, and the military-industrial complex that is plundering and plaguing our planet, making corporations very wealthy, extracting from the planet valuable resources, exploiting human life, human labor, all making us more vulnerable in the climate crisis, all making us more vulnerable for conflict. I'm a descendant of the indigenous Chamorro people who lived in the Marianas Islands in the archipelago for almost 4,000 years. And it's impossible to overstate the consequences we are forced to endure because of US colonization and militarization and the unjust policies and laws which fail to protect us from avoidable harm and obstruct our political, economic, environmental, spiritual, and cultural sovereignty. So we are so familiar with how bases, increased military presence, war games, military exercises, how they actually make us more insecure. And so we are really excited to, be in conversation with you all, to learn from each other, to learn how we've resisted various waves of oppression and violence, but also, how we can really strengthen our voices together to really bring back, the importance of international humanitarian law, but human rights law, but also, just a better new world order than what we're living in right now. And so I'm just going to share a few slides really quickly. And hope to enlighten some of what I've already mentioned, but I organize with a group called Prutehi Guåhan. You can learn more about our organization in Guam at our Instagram. This link will take you to our Instagram, and there are so many ways that our vulnerabilities are connected, as I mentioned. And so, of course, we know that the things that really create conflict and security risks are the climate crisis, poverty, and US intervention that triggers instability. And we're all stuck in these coercive and restrictive agreements. In our case, we're a colony. We're an unincorporated territory of the United States. We do not vote for president or a member of Congress that has a vote. We have a non-voting member of Congress. So we're very limited in the ways we can participate in the US political system and advocate for what's right for our islands. And so this is a result of the Spanish-American War, and it's the same relationship that the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas Islands have, the islands north of us, as well as the US Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa. But for sovereign nations, there are many coercive and restrictive agreements, like in Micronesia and the Marshall Islands. There are the Compacts of Free Association, which are extremely coercive. And you can see it reflected, for instance, in the votes of those countries in the UN. And then for sovereign countries, there's also, the Mutual Defense Treaty and the Status of Forces Agreement, which allows the United States, and the Compacts of Free Association allows the United States to occupy land, air, and sea for military purpose. And it's all under the guise of national security. But colonies and sovereign nations, we really should take a pause to really understand what that means, because we have our own homelands, and the United States right now is really trying to tell us that we are all an extension of that homeland. And they're really setting us up to be stomping grounds for war, should they go to war with China, which they're saying is inevitable. And it's just really interesting how they are willing to go to war to protect the sovereignty of Taiwan, while ignoring the sovereignty of their colonies. And so we've got all of these coercive and restrictive relationships. And of course, we have a long history of unresolved violent crimes, the history of military sexual violence from even the Japanese colonial period and World War II period until immediately after, where and beyond, when after the United States establishes U.S. military bases in all of our areas around the Pacific Asia region. So of course, there's the issue of comfort women, but also Camptown women. And we see manifestations of those things similarly in other parts. And this is also connected to the phenomenon of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Alaska and the United States and Turtle Island, where even around places of extraction used for manufacturing weapons for the military industrial complex, we are seeing these atrocities, this crises of women being abducted and children, women, children, and men actually being abducted, murdered, disappeared. And so we have this long unresolved issue. And then we also have, all of us, a legacy of environmental justice issues and contamination, destruction of our ecosystem, the introduction of invasive species from the U.S. military that has hurt our ecosystems, as well as high incidence of contamination from oil spills, PFAS and PFOS, Agent Orange, lead, and several other things, including unexploded ordnance, and also negligent storage of military hazardous waste. And of course, there's issues of accountability, transparency, and underreporting. For all of these things, the U.S. military has had a history of underreporting and a total lack of transparency. And we have very few ways of holding them accountable for the harms that are caused all of our communities, from Hawaii to the Philippines, Guam to Korea to Okinawa and Japan. All of our communities are affected by nonstop war games, all of these joint military training exercises, practicing for war. We're also inundated with comment periods, ways how we participate in either the National Environmental Policy Act in the United States or countries' own protective laws, which the United States has a reputation for breaking. For instance, there are 5 projects happening in Palau right now, all of which are undermining the laws of Palau. And so this is just another phenomenon that we're constantly dealing with. Water contamination, a lot of our sole sources, either our aquifers, our rainforests, other waterways have been contaminated. Land taking and displacement, a huge issue. They've often taken our best agricultural lands, our best coastal areas, our most pristine forests for building bases. And this is something we've seen over and over and over again, from Okinawa to Korea to Guam to Hawaii. It's actually devastating. On top of that, they are desecrating many ancestral burials. And as I mentioned, all of these issues have huge consequences of true security, of genuine security. Housing crises, healthcare crises, true strain on our public healthcare systems, which are all severely underdeveloped, especially in the islands. Food and water security crises as well. At the same time, there's a suppression of dissent. People are really afraid to challenge the government, challenge the military. And that's why we really look to all of you who have had long movements, generations now, unfortunately, resisting US imperialism and militarization. And so I'm sorry, this is supposed to say genuine security and solidarity. And so we really need to work toward genuine security and, of course, international solidarity. And then just to give you a quick graphic, this was the last census for Guam. According to the 2020 census, we had just over about 154,000 residents in Guam. And in addition to that, about 21,700 military members and family members here as well. So it's quite a huge presence that they have in our small island and among our very small population. And it's expected to expand to maybe up to 40,000, including contractors and families, within the next 10 years. And so right after the war, the United States took a lot of land for building up bases. Today, they control 30% of the island's land area. All of the black spaces indicate installations, and much of that land has been contaminated, and many ancestral burials and sacred sites have been desecrated. And we have not fared well as colonial subjects of the United States. And we can see a lot of these same issues, again, in the other indigenous communities around the Pacific and in Asia that have the presence of US military bases. And so again, this really reflects how US colonization and militarization makes us more insecure. And so how have we fared? Well, 30% of our indigenous population lives below the poverty line. We have a very high rate of high school dropouts. We have a very low rate of college graduates or higher. While we only make around 40% of the population for Guam, we represent 60% of our incarcerated population. 1 in 3 Indigenous Chamorro women have experienced domestic or sexual violence. And I actually think that this number is a lot higher. This is a figure that comes from the University of Guam. And Chamorro children make up a majority of over 3,000 cases reported annually of child abuse and violence. And like many other Pacific Islanders, Chamorros are overrepresented disproportionately in US military service and in combat. And once again, all of this, while we have very limited political representation, we don't vote for the president and we don't have a voting member in Congress. And so we also have very limited constitutional protection. I wanted to share this image to also really demonstrate how we're all connected through US militarization. This is a map from Newsweek magazine. I've been sharing it a lot lately, but it has the United States all the way up here in this top right corner. And then Japan is here, and South Korea, North Korea, and China. And then they've set up 3 island chains. They call these defensive chains for the United States, but of course we see them as sites of US force projection, and offensive sites of where attacks can be launched from our areas. And of course, this makes us all larger targets in a conflict, or also first strike communities. And so it's also them trying to keep us in a perpetual state of fear. There's a lot of fear mongering that war with China is inevitable. And we really need to resist that narrative, because we know that diplomacy and really strategy can make it possible to prevent war, but they are making a ton of money. The corporations are making a ton of money getting these contracts to build up all of these sites and all of this weaponry. And so the third chain here from the United States, this is the third island chain. It includes Hawaii, American Samoa, and New Zealand. And then we're in the second island chain. It includes Palau, Yap, Guam, the Northern Marianas, that include Saipan and Tinian. And then Japan sort of is kind of connects both the first and second island chain that includes South Korea, Okinawa. So this is the first island chain, Taiwan, Philippines, and Singapore. And then Australia is here. And then this is another map that also shows all of the comfort stations that the Japanese imperial forces had during World War II. And so again, this is connected to the long history of unresolved war crimes, violence against women, and military sexual violence. But really how far-reaching this is quite alarming. Here we can see the Federated States of Micronesia and Chuuk. Here's Guam, Tinian, and Saipan. Here's Palau, and all of East Timor, Indonesia, Vietnam, all the way here. And then of course we have Korea, Japan, and Okinawa. And so it's quite a large area, and again, part of the unresolved issues. And as I mentioned, we have all of these unresolved issues of contamination. Agent Orange, Dieldrin now is in several of our areas, Philippines, Guam, Hawaii, PFAS and PFAS. All of us have contamination from US military use of AFFF firefighting foam. We also have issues of lead and other explosive materials, hazardous waste from munitions, oil spills, unexploded ordnance, and negligent hazardous waste disposal. So a lot of this stuff was left stored somewhere, forgotten about, only to leak and contaminate in the many years later. And then a lot of us also suffered from radiation and contamination from nuclear fallout from the U.S. nuclear tests in the Marshall Islands. Of course, none of this has been resolved, remediated, or removed. And it's a serious issue because a lot of us are dealt with U.S. military waste, and the laws prevent us from transiting and transporting that waste to the United States. So we're stuck with it. We're also stuck with the bills to clean this up and also deal with the health impacts our communities are facing, the horrible diseases, the deaths from all of this contamination. And of course, the U.S. has a lack of legal obligation because of the agreements mentioned earlier, because of the limitations in either our colonial relationships or otherwise coercive relationships. And then again, the joint military exercises. These images on the right are from the recent RE4PAC exercises here in Guam. These were published in the Stars and Stripes military publication, but the image on the bottom is actually a Japanese helicopter firing a missile in waters around Guam. And this image on the top, this RE4PAC had Japan, South Korea come to Guam for this training, Australia. And so these are nuclear warships in the waters surrounding Guam. So this is just a list of just some of the war games and training exercises that we're subjected to. But it's really important to mention that these are a lot of sovereign nations participating together. So there's, Korea, Japan, Singapore, the Philippines. But these exercises in Australia, New Zealand, these exercises are taking place in islands like Guam, Saipan, Palau. And a lot of the incidents of contamination and accidents are not made available to the public. And a lot of these things like firing missiles in the ocean, they're not cleaned up, they're not remediated, and blowing up ships during RIMPAC, for instance, in Hawaii. RIMPAC and Talisman Sabre are extremely massive, and each happens on the opposite year. So this basically keeps the Pacific and Asia in a nonstop cycle of these war games. And every time we have them, there's a rise in violent crime. There's a rise in accidents. There's a rise in sexual violence and a rise in contamination that we don't address or know about right away. A lot of it is kept from us, or we find out in the media later that some of these things have happened. But these are just some of the exercises here. RE4PAC, Freedom Shield, Pacific Vanguard, Cope North, Valiant Shield, RIMPAC, Talisman Sabre, Exercise Sea Dragon, Pacific Dragon, Resolute Dragon, Freedom Edge, Bushido Guardian, and Balikatan. So a lot of you are familiar with these, of course. And so another issue is this idea of relocation, that the Marines in Okinawa did so many horrible things, so we're going to move them to Guam, which is simply an extension of the United States. And once again, we're a colony of the United States, and we do not consent, and we're not even a part of the process in which those decisions are made. And so, but also I put relocation in quotes because they're not really reducing the burdens in Okinawa. They're just redistributing them and building them up in other parts, which is just devastating. It's criminal. It's a real manipulation. It's not a true solution. And so with the relocation of Marines from Guam, we're going to have several harmful impacts, including, the loss of many threatened and endangered species. They're building a firing range, which is almost complete. 5 ranges in a complex of 5. 4 of those 5 are finished, and 7 million rounds of munitions will be fired over our sole source aquifer every single year. And this aquifer provides our island with up to 90%, about 80 to 90% of our drinking water. And over 1,200 acres of land has been cleared for the basin ranges. And then 3 miles of ocean here, you can see in the map, are also going to be taken for the surface danger zone. This is horrible, but this is some of the richest fishing area in Guam and around Guam, and actually has been for centuries. Our ancestors knew it, and we even have a world record for one of the largest fish caught here. And so these are some of those impacts. But also, they're not the only ones talking about relocation or considering relocation. Earlier this year, it was announced that the US was considering withdrawing thousands of troops from South Korea to relocate them to Guam. And then also at the end of last year, Japan's new prime minister proposed even having a base for Japan in Guam. And so not only is the United States occupying us, but they're thinking of ways of relocating some of their forces from other parts of Asia Pacific here, or other sovereign nations are thinking about how they can also occupy our airspace and our land for their military. This is just an example of some of the ancestral burials desecrated. This is at the Urban Warfare Training Range. These are several burials. This is actually an obstacle course that they rerouted after they found some burials, ancestral burials. These are ancestors who have been there for over 1,000 years, and it's just devastating that they're being disturbed in their final resting place for basically a fake city that they get to play war in and bomb and shoot guns in while we're having a housing crisis, while our hospitals falling apart, while our schools are falling apart. It's really disgusting to see how really the needs of our communities are being totally ignored in prioritizing military occupation and preparation for war. These are some of the endangered species that are impacted. Here we have our finihi or fruit bat, and which is an endangered species. We have our flightless rail or our cuckoo bird. We have our kingfisher here, and this is a very special butterfly. This is the 8-spot butterfly, and it has a special relationship with traditional medicinal plants, and each one cannot exist without the other. The butterfly and the plant need each other to survive. And so it's also affecting traditional medicines and the knowledge of that, our language and our connection and relationship to the land. Just to share a few more issues in Guam, last year we had the first missile test last December. We found out about it in August. They had a very short comment period because it did not follow a process that required an environmental impact statement. Instead, they went through a process called a finding of no significant impacts, which limited and fast-tracked the process for them to start missile testing. So they're firing these missiles from the north of Guam into the ocean. There's no plans for remediation or removal. And what's most disturbing about this is it doesn't include the northern islands, which are quite close, and how this encroaches into their economic zone, and all of the issues that they might be susceptible to have not been considered in those plans. And then this is a map here of the 16 sites for the Guam Missile Defense System. Thousands of acres of limestone forests are also being cleared for that, and there is military contamination already existing in a majority of those sites. It's also going to affect land access for private landowners in the north of Guam, and as you can see up here is the Air Force Base where most of the sites are going to be located. It's like they're trying to turn the whole northern side of Guam into a death zone. Over here is where the firing range and new Marine base is. This is the Air Force Base, and over here is where open detonation occurs. And this is a picture of open detonation. Right now we're in a lawsuit against the Air Force's permit application. This is where they do open detonation in Guam. They haven't done open burning in 20 years, but their permit application did include a plan for that. And then this is the site of the Divert Airfield in Tinian. This is the same airfield that the atomic bombs were launched from that landed on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. It was abandoned and is now being cleared and rebuilt as a divert airfield. So what that means is that when Guam is attacked and devastated by war, the military has a place to quickly relocate its assets. And so it's also building up in Palau, as I mentioned earlier, as well as Yap and the islands of Rota and Saipan for building up for storage, refueling, and building up the airports there. And so all of us must come together to demand genuine security. We must build solidarity to resist imperialism and the military industrial complex. We must demand decontamination, remediation of the existing military contamination and the prevention of future contamination, but also the removal of bases and the return of lands that were taken to build those bases. We must demand justice for military sexual violence and crimes of war that have never been recognized. And we must fight for decolonization in occupied lands. This also means that, for instance, we stand in solidarity with other occupied lands resisting imperialism and fighting for their decolonization, such as Hawaii. And, we hope that you also join our struggle for our decolonization. And it's also really important that as sovereign countries that other sovereign countries rather in Asia, in the Asia Pacific region, resist AUKUS, the plans for nuclear submarines. This is an alliance between Australia, the UK, and the US. It started during the Biden administration just a couple of years ago in 2021. It seemed that the Trump administration didn't know what it was about, but have just now this week decided to support the alliance and continue with the plans to build the nuclear subs. Again, this is in, anticipation for a war with China. And then this is something that's really critical because Korea is engaged in deep sea mining in the Pacific. And this is an issue of sovereignty as well as desecration. As Pacific peoples, we are connected to the ocean. Our ancestors came from the ocean. For a lot of us, the ocean is even where our ancestors return after they pass away. And so we have a sacred relationship with the ocean. A lot of us come from navigating histories. And so deep sea mining is a horrible injustice to Pacific nations. And we really need sovereign nations to really try to prevent it because a lot of those rare earth minerals are going towards weapon development, and this is the new arms race, deep sea mining. And so we really need to also come together to resist deep sea mining. And then of course, the never-ending war in Korea is connected to the military expansion here in Guam. And so in Guam, we also stand in solidarity to demand an end to the Korean War and to also hope for reunification for Korea. The United States has played a tremendous role in keeping the war going, keeping the North and South separated. And it's time for healing and reconciliation. And we support the Korean people's struggle for this justice. We are more than our legacies of war and survival, and our resilience as war survivors cannot be weaponized to justify more harm and destruction. Our struggles for true liberation are deeply connected. And so with that, I'm going to end with these two pictures from Guåhan to Korea Demilitarized Now. This was actually a protest that happened last year in 2024. And then this was also another protest during our Liberation Day parade in 2024 saying we are not the tip of the spear, that we've been called the tip of the spear, and it's something we don't take pride in. We're not the tip of the warrior spear to be bloodied and broken in battle and abandoned. We are more than these things. We're more than the stomping grounds for war. We're more than collateral. We are not disposable, and we are stronger together. And so we send a message from Guåhan that we stand with the people of Korea. We stand with all people fighting against oppression and injustice, fighting for the removal of US militarization and imperialism from our homelands, and fighting for genuine security. Sizos Masi, and thank you all so much. It's an honor to be with you.